a very interesting topic. Come along. Now, this our objective. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain genetics, define the common terms in genetics, then explain Mendel's experiment, that's the monohybrid inheritance, then explain Mendel's first law of inheritance. Now let's look at some common terms when it comes to heredity. Let's look at genetics. When we talk about genetics, we can say that it is a branch of biology that deals with the transmission and variation of inherited characteristics in a particular chromosome and then DNA. Let's move on to heredity. When we talk about heredity, we can say that this is the transmission of characteristics or traits from parents to their progeny or offspring through genes. Okay, another term we'll look at is what? Traits. When we talk about traits, what are they? We can say that it's a characteristics or quality that distinguishes an individual and can be inherited. So when you look at your mate, you realize that there is a particular difference between the two of you, and then it's a trait that their parent or your parents pass on to you. So whatever you get from or you inherited from your parents, you can say, oh, it's a trait that you get from them or they transmit to you. Now, let's look at chromosomes. When we talk about chromosomes, we can say that they are thread-like structures containing DNA and protein in the nucleus of the eukaryotic cells. Now, these chromosomes also contains genes that are transmitted to you or to offsprings. Now, let's look at genes. What are genes? When we talk about genes, it's a specific segment of chromosomes that codes for a particular trait or character. Then alleles. What are alleles? We can say that they are the alternative forms of a gene that occupy the same locus on homologous chromosomes, and then they produce constructing characteristics. That is, in plant, for example, in plant height, we have the capital T for tall, and then for tall allele, and then the small t for a dwarf allele. All right, let's look at the types of alleles. We have two types of allele. That's the dominant allele and then recessive allele. When we talk about the dominant allele, it is called the alternative form of a gene which marks the effect of the other gene. So for example, let's take capital T to represent a dominant allele for the gene or the trait for tallness. So this is the dominant allele. Then the recessive allele is an allele which has its effect marked by the alternative allele. So the effect is marked by the allele or for the dominant allele. So we have the small t to represent the recessive allele when it comes to the gene for tallness or the height in plant. Okay, now let's continue with the terms. Let's look at homozygote. Homozygote is another term when it comes to genetics. You can say that a homozygote is a cell that contains two identical alleles for a particular character. So when we look at this, we are still using the height of plant. So let's take it for example. We have the capital T be a homozygote, or the small t also being a homozygote. But we have what? Homozygous dominant. When we talk about homozygote dominant, we can say that it's a situation where the two alleles controlling a character are all dominant. So we can use examples. So we are using the height in plants. So capital T represents a homozygote dominant. That means the alleles looks the same. So we can say that they are what? Homozygote. Then when we talk about homozygote recessive, is the situation where the two alleles controlling a character are all recessive ones. For example, we can use the small t to represent the recessive allele for homozygotes. Now let's look at the next term, which is genotype. When we talk about genotype, we can say that it's the genetic makeup of an organism in terms of a particular set of alleles it possesses. So for example, we have capital T to be homozygote dominant. We have the capital T to be heterozygote. Then the small t being the homozygote recessive. Now let's look at a dominant character. What is a dominant character? A dominant character is a character which is expressed in the presence of an alternative form. So, for example, let's take or let's represent capital T to be a dominant allele for height in plants, which is for tallness, which is the dominant character. Then, when we talk about the recessive character, we can say that it's a character which cannot be expressed in the presence of an alternative form. It can only be expressed in homozygote state. So, for example, let's take the small t to represent the recessive allele for shortness, which is the recessive character, or which represents the recessive character. Now let's talk about phenotype. When we talk about phenotype, we can say that it is the physical appearance of an organism determined by both the genotype and its environment. So for example, we have tall or dwarf when it comes to plants or the height of plants. Then we have black or white when it comes to the fur of a mouse. So an environmental factor, for example, nutrition, can affect the height in plants. That is showing the phenotype. Now let's talk about monohybrid inheritance. When we talk about monohybrid inheritance, we can say that it's a transmission of one character from parent to offspring. When we talk about monohybrid cross, we can say that a monohybrid cross is a cross between two parents who differ in only one genetic character. So for example, let's take the height of plants. One plant may be tall and then the other may be short. So in this case, we are just looking at their height. That is the monohybrid. Then let's talk about Mendel's experiment. Mendel's conducted an experiment using pea plants. Now, in this pea plant, Mendel's looked at some characters in the pea plant, which are the height of plant, the color of the seed or color of seed coats, shape of seed coats, the color of fruits, shape of fruits, and then color of flower. Then the last one, position of flower. So Mendel's looked at 7 characters in the pea plant. Now, why did Mendel choose a pea plant? Mendel chose a pea plant because he realized that the pea plant is having a short lifespan, and then the pea plant also contains a lot of characters that he can study. Then he can also determine or monitor or control the pollination of the pea plant. All right. So now, how did Mendel carry out this experiment? Mendel breed a particular plant. That's let's take the height. He continues to breed the height, that's the tall, for a number of years or time. Then he breed the short one for a number of years or time. So it becomes a pure breed. So now, Mendel tried to cross-pollinate this pure breed. So let's take height for example. He crossed a tall plant and then a short plant. Now, in Mendel's he realized that is the tall and then the short, they are the parental plants. So the parental plants are making up the pure breed. So after crossing the pure breed, he realized that which are the parental plants, rather the first generation or the first filial generation were all tall. Now Mendel asked himself, I cross a tall plant with a short plant. Why is it that all of them are tall? So he decided to cross the first filial generation to get the. So Mendel crossed the first filial generation, or he self-pollinates the first filial generation to get the second filial generation. And then he realized that the ratio of the second filial generation is 3:1. Now Mendel don't stop the experiment on only height. He conducted the experiment on other characters as well. And then each experiment, he realized that they are all having the 3:1 ratio. So this genetic cross represents the height of the pea plant. So we have the parental generation, that is a tall pea plant and then a short pea plant. The tall pea plant is the pure breed, and then the short pea plant is also a pure breed. So now when you cross these two breeds, all the offspring, which is the first filial generation, were all tall. So now he self-pollinates the first filial generation, which is the tall or heterozygote tall, to get the second filial generation. So the second filial generation, we have three of the, or the ratio of it is what? You have tall, 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 and then what? A short plant, which is the 3:1 ratio. So this example of or a monohybrid cross in the height of a pea plant. Now Mendel. So after the experiment, Mendel concluded that traits are controlled by factors called genes. And then each organism has two alleles for a trait. Then one of the alleles dominates over the other. Then the last one, the alleles separate during reproduction, which is the law of segregation. That is Mendel's first law of inheritance. Now, thank you. Bye-bye. Before we meet in class, try your hands on these questions. Define the following terms in genetics: alleles, dominant allele, recessive allele, homozygote dominant, and then homozygote recessive, then heterozygote. Then state Mendel's first law of inheritance. Meet you in class. Bye-bye.